Let's just dive right in. This whole explainer, it's about you. More specifically, it's about the very strange, historically unique, and frankly, globally rare way that your brain sees the world. Now, you probably think your way of thinking is just, well, normal, right? But what if I told you it's actually one of the most unusual psychological profiles this planet has ever seen? So there's this anthropologist, Joseph Henrich, and his whole idea is that our minds are not blank slates. Not at all. They are products of history and culture. As this quote gets at, the society we grow up in literally rewires our brains. It shapes everything from our emotions to our sense of fairness to our very idea of who we are. And for people living in the modern West, well, that rewiring has been especially deep. So, let's make this personal. Are you one of them? If you're watching this, the answer is almost certainly yes. But what does that even mean? And no, it has nothing to do with being quirky or eccentric. It's actually a very specific scientific acronym. So, what does it stand for? WEIRD is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Now, this is not a judgment call. It's a psychological label. It describes the slice of humanity that for decades, psychologists studied almost exclusively, just assuming they represented everyone. But here's the twist. It turns out weird people are the outliers. We are the psychologically peculiar ones. Okay, here's a perfect example of what we're talking about. People like us, we're often driven by guilt. That's that internal feeling you get when you don't live up to your own standards. Think about it. Nobody else has to know you skipped the gym for you to feel bad about it. But in most other societies, the big motivator is shame. And shame is external. It's all about failing your community standards, about losing face in front of your people. See the difference? One is all about you, the individual. The other is all about your relationship to the group. So, to really get how weird psychology even came to be, we've got to go back, way back. We need to understand what was the default setting for humanity for almost all of our history. And that default was a social operating system built on one thing: kinship. And this is where things get really mind-bending for us today. For most of human history, your identity had almost nothing to do with your personal goals or your unique personality. Your identity was your web of relationships, who you were married to, who your cousins were, what clan you belonged to. That's who you were. You literally were your relationships. So let's put these two side by side. It is a huge contrast. Weird psychology is intensely individualistic. We're obsessed with our personal attributes, our achievements, what makes us special. But kin-based psychology is relational. Your identity comes from the group, and what's valued is conformity and keeping the group in harmony, not standing out as an individual. And this difference, it even changes who we trust. Weird people are pretty good at something called impersonal trust. We're willing to trust and cooperate with total strangers because we believe in a system of impartial universal rules. But in a kin-based world, no way. Trust is reserved for your in-group, for your family. Loyalty to your kin is the absolute highest moral good. Nepotism isn't seen as corruption, it's your duty. And that one shift is the foundation for everything from modern economies to democracies. So, this leads us to the big question, the central mystery of this whole thing. If this kin-based way of life was the human norm for thousands and thousands of years, what on earth happened? What force was so powerful that it could shatter this ancient system in just one part of the world and set its people on a totally different psychological path? Well, the answer Henrich proposes is surprising. It wasn't the Enlightenment. It wasn't the Industrial Revolution, not at first anyway. The story starts way earlier, with one incredibly powerful institution that decided to remake the most fundamental building block of society, the family. For about 1,000 years, starting way back in late antiquity, one branch of Christianity, the one that would become the Roman Catholic Church, started to roll out this very peculiar and frankly unprecedented set of rules about marriage. Henrich calls it the Marriage and Family Program, or MFP for short. And these were not minor tweaks. This was a systematic demolition of the kinship system. The church banned marriage to pretty much any relative you could think of, including distant cousins and even in-laws. This was a direct assault on those dense, interwoven family networks. They banned having multiple wives, which broke the power of elite family lines. And by discouraging arranged marriages and adoption, they weakened a clan's control over its own members. It was a slow-motion demolition of the old world that took centuries. So what happens when you completely dissolve the social structure that has organized human life forever? Well, you get a massive domino effect, a cascade of psychological and social changes that no one could have predicted. And the core idea here is that as those old family ties started to break down, people were basically set adrift in a new social world. They had to figure out how to survive and cooperate without them. And to do that, they needed a whole new mindset. They started to think of themselves less as just a part of a network and more as unique individuals defined by their own skills and attributes. And look, this isn't just a historical story. There is some really compelling data to back this up. What you're seeing here is a powerful pattern. On the one side, you have the historical rates of cousin marriage, basically a proxy for kinship intensity. On the other side, you have a measure of things like trust in strangers. And the pattern is just undeniable. The longer a place was under the influence of the Western Church's marriage program, and therefore had weaker kinship ties, the more individualistic and trusting of strangers its people are today. It's a striking correlation. Now, socially, the fallout from this was enormous. Without the safety net of their clan, people had to become more mobile. They started moving to new towns and cities looking for work and opportunity. But of course, they still needed community. They still needed to cooperate. They just had to invent completely new ways of doing it. And this led to a totally new kind of social world. People started forming groups, but these groups weren't based on blood anymore. They were based on shared interests and professions. You get guilds for craftsmen, universities for scholars, chartered towns run by merchants. These were all voluntary associations of like-minded individuals, a brand new way of organizing a society, and it required that new, more individualistic mindset to even work. Okay, so we have this new psychology brewing in Europe, but how did that psychological shift end up building the modern world that we recognize today? Let's connect those last few dots. Here's the whole chain reaction laid out. It all starts with the Church's marriage and family program weakening kinship. That forces people to create new voluntary groups. These groups, like guilds and universities, become these amazing knowledge societies where ideas are shared openly, even between strangers. And that open sharing, that collective brain, sparks an absolute explosion of innovation. You can literally see this explosion happening right here. This chart shows the number of scientific and technical societies just taking off in Europe. This isn't just a line on a graph. This is the institutional footprint of a brand new way of thinking, a world where you gained prestige by sharing new discoveries, not by hoarding secrets within your family. So when you put it all together, the results are immense. This new, weird, psychology-fueled innovation, it built massive markets that could only work because of impersonal trust. It even fostered psychological traits like patience and self-control, and it laid the groundwork for impartial laws and representative governments. All the hallmarks of the modern world. And what's wild is, people from outside of Europe could see this happening, even way back then. As early as the 14th century, the great Arab historian Ibn Khaldun looked over at Europe, what he called the lands of the Franks, and he was basically scratching his head. He saw what was then a relative backwater suddenly bubbling with this intense intellectual energy. He was witnessing the very early stages of this massive psychological and social transformation. And that brings us right back to today, right back to us. The story of how we got to be weird is this powerful reminder that who we are, how we think, is so deeply shaped by the world we build around ourselves. And that process, it hasn't stopped. So the big question is, if the Church's marriage rules could so profoundly rewire the human mind over centuries, what are the institutions of our time, the internet, social media, global markets, doing to our brains right now? What kind of human is being forged in the 21st century? That's the question this history leaves us with.